are delighted. This is a webinar that Converge and Harms Consulting decided to partner on, and we are delighted with the huge response that we got for individuals who are interested in this topic of recruitment and specifically around converting digital leads into enrolled students. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us today and for spending an hour with us. We have, I think, quite a bit of information to cover, as is, of course, the standard if you've been involved in too many of my webinars. We have a lot of information to cover. I do want to encourage and invite you to feel free to submit questions as they come to you. Becky from Converge is going to do an amazing job of keeping track of those, and towards the end we'll do a little Q&A. And then if there are questions that I don't have an opportunity to address within the context of the webinar itself, I will certainly do some follow-up via email with each of you. So we'll send that information out afterwards if we don't get all the questions covered while we're here today. I'm going to need to figure out how to move my slides. Sorry about that. Before we dive in, I do want to take just a minute and do a bit of promotion here for Converge upcoming conference, multiple day conference down in New Orleans. Towards the end of the month of October, so the 21st and 22nd, and then I know they have some post-conference sessions as well on the 23rd. I know I'm planning to be there, and I'm speaking and doing a post-conference session on recruitment, and really want to encourage all of you, if you haven't had a chance, to go to the Converge website and check out the great speakers and really interesting topics that are going to be involved in that multiple day conference. Please take a minute and do so. I know I would love to see you there, as would Converge. I've already thanked you for your time, so I want to make this as worthwhile as possible for all of you that are in attendance today. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right into content, and we'll move forward from there. Like I said, don't hesitate to submit questions as you have them, and this recording will be made available to after the presentation. It'll probably be a couple of days before we get that sent out to you, and that will also be accompanied by the slides. So please know that that information, all the information shared today, will be forthcoming to your email address after our presentation today. Okay, let's dive in. So when I sat down to begin putting together this webinar and knew of the interest that Converge received immediately upon sending out the initial promo for this webinar, I started to think very carefully about why are people so engaged with this topic. And it really does come back to, the big aha, the need for enrollment growth across adult and graduate programs. This is a nationwide trend. This is not just your university president or board of directors or your VP for enrollment being difficult with you. Every school in the country right now is trying to grow their adult and graduate population. So it is certainly something that is timely from that perspective. Thinking about growing enrollment today, though, is a bit of a different game than it has been historically. And I'm always I feel obligated somehow to remind everyone of the realities of our current climate. And so we're going to ease in to the webinar with a little bit of discussion around that. One of the things that we have to be conscientious of and mindful of as we think about trying to grow enrollment within our adult and graduate programs is the fact that enrollment growth, per se, is never going to be like it was in the past. If you've been in this industry for a little bit of time, if you've been in it 20 or even 25 years, you know how fabulously easy it used to be. But due to a number of pieces or a number of elements, those pieces just don't come together as easily as they used to. Certainly, competition is a big part of that. There are now multiple options for every single student who's considering returning to school at both the undergraduate degree completion level as well as the graduate level. The second piece is price sensitivity. I'm not going to spend this webinar beating all of us up about the cost of higher education, but obviously that's become a very prevalent national conversation. And so the issue around price sensitivity and the fear of the cost of going back to school is really something that keeps a lot of people away from a return to higher education. I noticed from looking at the attendee list, we have a lot of private institutions on this webinar, and I'm just going to go ahead and do a specific comment around that. Price sensitivity for private institutions, regardless if you have a better price or modified price or different price for your adult programs or for your graduate programs that are built for working adults, no one knows that. All they know is you're private, thus you're expensive. So price sensitivity is something you have to work doubly hard to overcome. I would also say with the real acceptance nationwide of online delivery, schools really do compete at a far broader level today than they used to. And then on top of that, one of the interesting pieces that we now have added to our mix of why enrollment growth is challenging is the emerging delivery modes. We are seeing many institutions become more and more creative, whether it's with competency-based learning or accelerated formats from a number of years ago, weekend offerings. We have gotten we've pushed ourselves outside of our comfort zone around delivery mode. And what that's created for us, again, is that real interesting competition with one another. So it's really not just about, do you have my program anymore? It's, do you have my program? What's it going to cost me? How is it going to be delivered to me? And is this something I can make work into my life? The other piece of enrollment growth success is going to be that real need to have a mix of lead sources. So where your leads are coming in from will greatly impact your ability to grow enrollment. The first couple of things listed here are really what have been the staples, if you will, within our industry. The referrals, the word of mouth. How many of your students don't say, oh, I know someone who went to school here, my aunt, my uncle, my cousin, the person I work with. Word of mouth referral, very popular. Direct transfer. If you are partnered up with a number of community colleges, which I'm sure a lot of you are, especially at the undergraduate level, that direct transfer. If you're at the graduate level, the recruitment of your own students, your own undergraduate students, you have a built-in lead pool there, and that absolutely makes sense. We also know that many of the institutions that I have worked with, as well as Converge works with, that, utilize a mix of traditional advertising within their marketing, and that too will be a lead source. The addition here is the digital sources, and really what's so interesting is that 15 years ago, let's say, many institutions like the institutions joining us for this webinar would perhaps not have considered needing to be in the digital advertising market very heavily. It really was an industry that was fairly dominated, at least at the start, by the for-profit industry. And what we have learned over time is that this is another place to add leads to our mix. So certainly enrollment growth is only going to take place if you are able to be purposeful in each of these areas. And of course, there's other lead sources as well. If you're a denominational institution, there's connections there. There's a lot of connections, but these are a bit of the core. The truth about enrollment growth in today's market is that it probably has more to do with the skills and the approach to recruitment than the ability to generate leads. And I know that probably just made a number of you give each other a sideways look and think this woman's crazy and doesn't know what she's talking about. But hear me out on this. What we know from most institutions is that there is a lead pool that exists. Is it as big as it used to be? Probably not. Is it what you wish it was? Probably not. But your ability to convert those leads will have much more to do with your success than the number of leads that get dumped in at the front end. And so the conversation and context of the conversation today really is going to focus around that notion of how do we recruit these students differently and purposefully, recognizing from the minute they quote unquote walk in our front door, virtually of course, that they are a different sort of lead, and thus we need to behave differently. So this sharpening of recruitment skills is really going to be a big piece, if you will, of our conversation and dialogue today. Some of the good news is that there's plenty of folks out there who probably need to purchase what we're selling. There's over 37 million people in the United States who've started school but never finished. That's a number that bothers me ad nauseum. If you've ever heard me speak, I talk about this all the time, that it keeps me up at night. I cannot even fathom being one of 37 million people who started and didn't get done and literally have nothing to show for their efforts in higher education. So if you're at the undergraduate level, good news is there's a population for you. If you're at the graduate level, 19% of Americans, it's just over 32 million people, are sitting on a bachelor's degree, and a big portion of them are looking for graduate school programs as well. So the good news is, on a national level, there's a population base that is ready and willing to be recruited. The other piece of this that I do want to reinforce and take just a minute to show you a couple of data points on is that people get that they need to go back to school. And nothing showed this more strongly for me than some data that the Lumina Foundation pulled together along with Gallup back in late 2012. So I think this is still timely data and timely information. A couple of other quick things around that research. So they did research with, I think it was just over 2,000 individuals who had not completed any sort of a degree beyond high school. And what they found out is that overwhelmingly people understand that financial security is tied to having education beyond high school. So again, 97% said they get that it's at least somewhat important to have education beyond high school for financial security reasons. They also fully understand, 67%, 2/3, understand that getting a good job is a very important reason for going back to school. So again, people get this already. For those who do not currently have a post-secondary degree or certificate, the majority agreed or strongly agreed that they'd feel more secure in both their job and financial future if they did have one. So again, everybody understands education is a pretty good thing. It is really something that would benefit them. Probably this last point is the one that I try to drive home most often when I'm speaking with people who are looking to grow enrollment. 41% of people who don't have a degree, at least according to this particular survey, have thought about going back to school within the last 12 months. 41%. 4 of every 10 people you bump into who do not have a degree have thought about going back to school within the last 12 months. Now, thinking about it and picking up the phone and calling your office are two very different things. And the thinking about it population is often where we see the digital lead coming in. These are truly people who are at the very early stages of contemplating a return to school. So the good news, we are selling a product, education, that people want and believe is valuable. The value proposition, and I know there's a lot, the industry has been a little beat up, if you will, lately. But the good news is the value proposition is still one that most people really do understand. And I didn't want to get us bogged down in looking at all of the data, but the labor market supports the idea that people need to go back to school to get good jobs, and that the number of jobs available for people with education versus without is growing and will continue to grow. There are many things that reinforce this. The other piece of the puzzle, if you will, is that higher education as a whole, the industry as a whole, is really beginning to understand the need to diversify their student audience. For many of you sitting in this room as the adult or graduate side of the shop, if you will, you are being looked at in a way that you perhaps have not been looked at before at your institution. And for some of you, you might say, yeah, they want more from us. And yes, that is absolutely true. They also, though, are more willing, I think, at this point in time than they ever have, most schools, more willing than they ever have been before, to truly listen to what are your needs, what are the things that you need to add to your skill sets or marketing mix than they have been before. You have a bigger chair at the table. Your value is going up. Now, with that value going up, there's also some responsibility, and that's where the enrollment growth piece of this comes into play. Never to be accused of being all sunshine and roses. There's also some challenges that come with the current situation in the current marketplace. Yes, we need to diversify our lead pool, and for many of us, we are programs who are older, more mature. We have been around for a number of years, and we have never had to do this before. We have not been forced to diversify our lead pool before. We also have to be willing to assess our lead pool and recruit accordingly. And that does mean taking a slightly different recruitment approach with, in this case, a digital lead than someone who walks in our door or a referral from a business or industry. We have to be willing to sharpen our skills, and this will mean for everyone doing things differently. And in higher education, although I'm not sure I know too many people who embrace change at every turn, but in higher education, we are a bit glacial in our pace of accepting change. And even though the adult and grad market, or the adult and grad portion of higher education, historically have been on the front end of most change, even we can be a little slow when it comes to the idea of needing to change our internal processes and procedures. So this webinar is hopefully really going to challenge some of that thinking. So we do need to be willing to assess and then change our approach depending upon our lead source. We have to be willing to segment both our messaging and, perhaps more importantly, the longevity of the messaging, more so today than we ever have before. How we recruit these students is really tied to length of time. And you'll see that in some samples that I'm going to share with you towards the end of the presentation. How we do this with a digital lead does need to look a bit different than how we do our recruitment dance, if you will, with those who are not digital. I have gone ahead and utilized made the mistake of utilizing the all caps because there are some pieces here that I think are important to highlight. I'm not yelling at you, although I am going to tell you I am raising my voice. It is not enough to simply have a CRM. And folks, I'm going to be honest, and complain about it. We have to be willing to utilize the functionality of our CRMs. And no one from the CRM industry is slipping me a $10 bill to say that. It's really, really crucial. I was on a college campus yesterday and said that most of the schools I work with don't utilize at least 50% of their CRM's functionality. I will tell you at some institutions it's far less than that. If your institution has invested in purchasing a car, the onus is on you not only to learn how to drive the car to get from point A to point B, but to know how to use the cruise control, to understand how to connect your Bluetooth, and all of the other fancy features. Most CRMs have been built with the idea of helping you, but you have to let them help you. And yes, that will mean you will have to take some additional steps within the context of that CRM to really help to highlight its benefits and make that car drive for you the best that it possibly can. But we have to do both. And we have to utilize a system of accountability to ensure that our people who are recruiting students are utilizing the CRM to its maximum capacity. We also have to be willing to value recruitment, in my opinion, differently than we have in the past. Recruitment and recruiters are a bit of an unusual breed of cat, if you will. And I consider myself one, so I know I'm in good company with that. But we're strange folks. We are individuals who literally get a personal rush out of that idea of grabbing someone's name, reaching out, usually repeatedly before any sort of relationship gets started, and then building a relationship. And that's a different person. We are willing to do the cold thing repeatedly with prospective students. And that makes us unusual and unique. But that's also a skill set. And quite frankly, not everyone has it. And if you don't, that's fine. But then you shouldn't probably be leading in a recruitment chair. We have to hire specifically with these skills in mind. We have to be willing to manage recruiters with that skill set in mind, which ties very much into the previous bullet of utilizing the functionality of a CRM. And we have to be willing to promote people based on their value with those skills. This is a different way of thinking in higher education. And I get that. I completely get that. But when you talk about enrollment growth and the things that we allow to get in our own way, how we value recruitment and the skills it takes to recruit is often a piece of the puzzle. All right, so let's get into it. Enough soapbox. Digital leads. What an interesting new lead source for some of us who have perhaps not ever been in the digital lead game before. I don't have any way of asking you all to raise your hands virtually or anything, but whether you are an institution who has utilized digital leads for decades, or if this is truly a lead source that you have not even stuck your toe in the water yet, but you're thinking about perhaps trying to engage and gain some digital leads, regardless of what end of the spectrum you're on, I believe that there will be some benefit in this for you. One of the things that I do want to comment on quickly is just to put some parameters around how I define what a digital lead is, because one of the things I found in the industry is that there are varying definitions. So when I think of a digital lead, I think of a lead that, and I'm just going to use search as one example, that I, Brenda Harms, sat down at my computer at 11 o'clock at night and typed in organizational leadership master's programs and hit return. And up on my screen popped a listing of potential matches to that search. And I then clicked into those links and found a couple of institutions that offer that sort of degree and turned over my information on an inquiry form. Not I filled out an application, but truly just on an inquiry form that's short and concise and tight, and asks for my name, my phone number, perhaps my email address, and just really tight information. Boom, I hit submit. That to me is a digital lead. I might have come in through Google. You might have seen you on a Facebook page. You might have been in through Bing, but that to me is a digital lead. What I'm going to share with you today would also hold relatively true through leads that you are purchasing through another source. So I just, off the top of my head, I think of like gradschools.com, some of those sorts of things. Digital leads you purchase through another source. This information holds true for those sources, but it's a more distant connection. So when I think of digital lead, that's what I'm thinking of when I put together this webinar. And I hope that makes perfect sense to everyone. I'm not sure I just articulated that very well. So a couple of things from the Brenda Harms school of thought, some of which I'm sure will, like I said, cause you all to look at one another. More leads is oddly enough not the answer to growing enrollment. It's interesting that in 8 years of doing consulting work, I've never been to a school that didn't tell me they needed more leads. Never once. I never hear, geez, we have this huge lead pool, we just have to get to it. People always believe they need more leads. I want to challenge your thinking on that a little bit if you'll let me. What I believe you actually mean when you look at me and say, Brenda, we need more leads, is what you're actually asking for is this. We need more people who completely on their own pick up the phone or send a form, call us, say, hey, I'm really interested in coming back to school, show up for a meeting, whether virtually or in person, carrying all of our transcripts, having our application completed, our FAFSA form completed, and literally being locked and loaded and ready to go, sit down, have a 30-minute conversation with an advisor, get signed up for class, and literally walk out the door enrolled. When schools tell me they want more leads, I have started translating it into, and I don't mean this to be offensive, I want more easy conversions. And I get wanting that. The fact of the matter is there's not a higher ed consultant in the country right now who can give that to you. Sorry, there's the bad news. I'm not one of them. I don't know how to find more of those people. I can find you more people, but you will have to do the work of converting them. And so when we say we want more leads, I want us to be clear on what we're asking for. Volume, quality, we can get into a whole conversation about that. But the fact of the matter is it's not always about we just need more. I don't need to dump 3,000 more leads into the top end of your funnel. What I need to help you do, or where I think I do have some power to help you, is to help you convert more of the leads you are already getting. There are plenty of ways to increase the number that go into the top of the funnel. And yes, investing in some digital marketing is certainly one of them. Obviously, you are all thinking about that or already have, or you wouldn't be on this webinar. But those are different sorts of leads, and they will convert a little bit differently. But more leads is often not the only answer to enrollment growth. And in fact, in many cases, it's not necessarily part of the answer at all. Conversion is where enrollment growth happens. And so that's really the focus of our conversation today, although I'm happy to field and entertain questions towards the end about how do we get more leads. But again, I don't have any magic bullet on that. There's really the game of conversion that you have the ability to influence. Here's the dirty little secret of digital leads, and all leads really. All lead sources are not created equal. They're just not. But you really do need all lead sources in order to grow enrollment. You will not grow enrollment the way I know your senior leadership wants you to, purely based on word of mouth, or purely based on traditional marketing, or purely based on the way you've done it for the last 10 years. It's not going to happen due to all the reasons I showed you on that first slide. The competition, the price sensitivity, the online, lots of reasons why we won't do this purely based on the type of leads we used to have. So adding digital leads into the mix, I think, is really a critical element for every institution right now. But they're not the same, and that's why we have to be willing to treat them differently. So how are they different? First and foremost, a digital lead is engaging with you far earlier in the enrollment funnel than that person who picks up the phone. For those of you who know me, you know I use analogies all the time, and I cross analogies all the time too. So apologize if I do too much of that. A digital lead is not someone who's looking to buy a car. A digital lead is somebody who's thinking about maybe they'd like to learn to drive. They're way a ways out from purchasing a car, but they're still an important customer. They're still an important prospect. You just have to recognize where they're at in their head. One of the things that those of us who work in higher ed can become almost immune to is what a huge decision coming back to school actually is. I refer to a digital lead as a dreamer. They truly are in early stages of dreaming about returning to college. I have been dreaming about perhaps a certificate at the graduate level or a second graduate degree for somewhere in the neighborhood of 3.5 years now. I'm not there yet. Please, if you're a school that offers anything, don't reach out to me. But when I am there, I will reach out to you. Digital leads are often at that early stage, and thus we have to stick with them longer. They are truly shoppers. One of the frustrations that I hear coming from schools often is that, quote, digital leads are good leads. And when I push schools to say, talk to me about how you worked those digital leads, what did you do to convert them, and how long did you do that? It truly is, well, in a couple of months, they're not enrolled. I would tell you that you need nearly a full year to truly assess the value of a digital lead. And yes, I recognize that is a long time. 6 months you're going to start to understand, but truly a full year is not unheard of. Just because a lead doesn't convert in those first few weeks doesn't mean the dream is dead. It just means it's taking some time to develop, and it's our job to make sure we continue to develop that lead. These leads will not behave like a referral or somebody who picks up the phone and calls you, and we have to shift our expectations. So when I think about a lead pool, and I do think of it in swim pool, there's the water that comes into the deep end, and there's the water that comes into the shallow end. This is the water that comes into the shallow end, and we have to know and recognize it's not going to make its way over to the deep end very quickly. We have to shift our expectations when we think about digital leads. So please, if you are an institution that implemented a digital lead strategy 2 or 3 months ago, and you have a list of 14 names that have come in from digital advertising, please do not sit down with that list of 14 and say, well, none of these students are enrolled yet. This isn't working. I would tell you, you have not given it anywhere near long enough from a time perspective, and where we really need to focus is, and what have you done to nurture those leads? So, responsibility back to us. I like to think of that lead, building that lead pool. I think of digital leads, and I'm gesturing sitting here in my house. I think of them as a foundation under a house. All the other lead sources can be built on top of this, but think of this as your foundation. Think about this as creating a pool or a group that over time will feed your total numbers, but it is not like adding on a quick broom to your house. This will take some time. I will also tell you, and this is the hard part of digital leads and converting digital leads as a recruiter, is that there's very little personal or professional gratification with digital leads. And this is why even your best recruiter might become very frustrated early on with digital leads, because these folks are hard to move. And for those of us who live and love to live in the world of the thrill of recruitment and got another one, set another appointment, made this happen, made that happen, this is the group that will frustrate us like crazy. So we really have to stay at our best and on top of our game to stay focused with this pool. I wanted to, when putting this webinar together, it occurred to me that just because of the chair I sit in, I have the opportunity to look at a lot of people's approach to converting leads and converting digital leads specifically. So I wanted to show you and just showcase for you some samples from schools. In the event you joined this webinar with the belief that I was going to give you here's what you have to do, as long as you follow this model, they'll all convert. I need to admit right now, I don't have that. What I am going to share with you is a couple of different models that I know schools that are using right now to try to convert digital leads, and in my opinion, are having pretty good success with that. And then I'm also going to show you a bit of a tweaked model that I really do believe almost any school could implement if you have the discipline, and that's what it comes down to often, if you have the discipline to follow through on this. So first some samples, and then I'm going to show you kind of a end product of what I would recommend. So many of you have seen this before. This is my staple standard. Here's how you should be recruiting every lead that comes into your lead pool. And I am a big believer in let's build off what we have in place. So I think the first question I want you to pose to yourself is, do we have something similar to this in place for every lead that comes in the funnel? If your answer to that question is no, so within the first month or so, you do not have minimally, give or take 8 contacts within the first 35 days. Your mission when you leave this webinar is not to try to put in place what I'm going to share with you at the end, but is to start here. Once you have this in place, you then have the ability to build out for the rest of the digital leads. So this is, to me, bare bones. This is how all schools should be recruiting at a minimum. And this was built for those who are going to email in and ask, well, what did this come from? Where did you even come up with this crazy notion? This is built from and is a process that I monitor and have monitored now for 8 years. I do this every single year. I pull together how usually it's between 8 and 12 schools are recruiting students who are quite successful. And I boil it down into not anyone's exact process, but a bit of a culmination of all the processes. So again, 8 contacts, first 35 days. I think it's a good rule of thumb. Here's your base. That's the first option. And again, these are just some samples of things I know other schools are using. Let me show you a second option here. Sorry. Option 2 literally condenses, oh wow, who would have thought that would happen? I'm sorry, I'm doing this from my home and my landline is ringing. I'm sure it's a telemarketer. It will go away shortly. Sorry about that interruption. So option 2, this is what one school that I have spent some time around has decided to take that 8 contacts model and condense it down into the first couple of weeks. So in the first 16 days, they actually do touch points. They do touch points with different people as well as different mediums. So certainly a mix here of both emails and phone calls. For them, their approach and their belief is that if within the first 16 days you haven't converted a lead, and they do this with digital leads as well as other types of leads, if you haven't converted a digital or a lead within that first 16 days, your likelihood goes down dramatically, so then they taper off. But they're very heavy on the front end of how they recruit, and specifically to digital. Option 3, and I'm going to show you, this one goes on for 2 slides. So option 3 is a process that's put in place specifically for digital leads with one institution that I'm familiar with. And they have a pretty, in my opinion, pretty aggressive and fine-tuned model here that they utilize, where they mix up a mix of phone calls and emails, but they also mix who's making those phone calls and emails, and then what the context of the messaging is about. So again, a pretty aggressive model, and let me show you what this looks like over the course of 35, in this case 36 days. They do 14 contacts over that time frame, but this is what they have found to be especially helpful with their digital leads. So a pretty aggressive model for 36 days. That first month. And then they taper. And I'm going to show you the taper here in a minute, but this gives you a context and a place to at least start with. And then here's a fourth option, a fourth sample. And this one will not take rocket science brains to follow, but this is literally an everyday contact model that I am very familiar with. One school who's utilizing this model specifically with their digital leads. And on some days, as you'll notice here in day 5, they do a blend of email and text messaging. And then I'm going to show you, I didn't show you all 35 days because you get the hint, you're all smart people. They do a blend of mediums on certain days, but literally every single day they are contacting that prospective student who inquired digitally for 35 days. So it's quite an aggressive blend of both email, phone calls, mail, and text messaging. So quite a blend there. I will tell you, I do find this to be a pretty aggressive model, but I will also say this is working pretty well for them. One of the questions I often get is conversion rates on digital leads. So if that was why you channeled into this webinar, I'm about to give you that answer. And I'm literally using air quotes right now because I don't think it's a hard and fast answer. The first thing I would tell you is every school needs to figure out what's their norm. Trying to base on national standards, again, it's a place to start, but that should not be your only benchmark. I want to know how you converted your digital leads for the last 6 months, and then let's compare it. Let's put a new model into place, and let's compare it to the next 6 months. That's your true baseline. But digital leads nationwide, industry norm is about 10% of digital leads convert. So everyone's now writing down 10%. I will tell you, most of the institutions that I have worked with, and the majority of the institutions I worked with when I worked with Converge for digital lead generation that they were doing were probably closer to 20% on conversion. So again, if you work at this hard and stay after it and are persistent, 20% is not outside of possibility. I have historically worked with one school that was actually able to edge that up to 30%. That's an outlier, but it can be done, and did that with a very small recruitment team, but just very diligent use of both phone and email. So I wanted to show you with these 4 samples, and I hope I haven't gone through them too quickly, is that, again, there's not one perfect science here. There's not one perfect method that if everyone uses it, they'll all be in the same boat. But what I hope you take away from these various models is the frequency piece that for many of you, you may or may not be engaging with. And then longevity, and we're going to get into the longevity conversation here. I wanted to show you those first 35 days consistently across a couple schools because it does seem to fray out from there. I put together, and this is from the School of Brenda Harms, so I take ownership for this, right or wrong. I put together a sample model for engagement that if I were working at an institution and operating a recruitment team, this is how I would urge our digital leads to be dealt with. And I will share with you just verbally how this will be different than how other lead sources would come in. One of the fears, I think, for all recruiters is I don't want to be perceived as hounding. Part of why I show you what some of other schools are doing is to help you to realize that, unless you really go off a deep end, the base for hounding is probably very different than what you're thinking that it is. I've actually had some conversations at some schools where truly they're like, oh, I've called them 3 times in 2 weeks. I hate to bother them anymore. 3 times in 2 weeks is hardly a drop in the bucket in comparison to some of your competitors. You need to at least be in the game. Nobody leaves such a fascinating voicemail message that you're going to be the one to get the call back. It's really about how do you reach out and contact people. So here's a sample model of what I put together. And as promised, remember, this is the base that I like to start with for all sorts of leads. So just building on this very solid base that hopefully many of you have something in place like this or are literally now in the process of thinking, we've got to get something in place like this. Here's where we get on divergent paths. If you come in as a digital lead, now, one more quick caveat before I go on. I don't think there's a huge harm in utilizing the digital lead approach with every lead source. I really don't. But I'm also trying to be a realist in that if every single one of 1,000 leads that comes into your shop in a year gets dealt with in exactly the same way, you're probably going to wear some folks out. So digital leads are the leads where I would amp up your contact and mix of contact and human contact more so than some of the other lead sources, which hopefully you've had higher conversion rates on at the front end here. So again, here's your baseline. This works for all lead sources. And then here's where we continue down a slightly different path with digital leads. So you'll notice here I was super creative and spaced these 15 days apart. And again, no magic in 15, make it 14 if it makes you feel better. But that idea of a consistent blend over months of both phone calls and electronic communications. And I have trickled in here some mail pieces as well. And yes, for those of you whose eyes are bulging out right now, you're like, I'm still calling these people at 120 days? Yes, you need to be. Because remember, I gave you my submission. I submitted my form to you on a night that I was dreaming. And 4 months later, my dream might be a little bit closer now. And so I want you to keep reaching out to me. I want you to keep engaged with me. And this is assuming that you can't move me beyond just having a phone conversation. So if you reach me on day 45 and I say to you, oh, geez, that was, a bit of a crazy fantasy going back to school. I don't know what I'm thinking. I have 3 kids under age 6, and this isn't the right time. I just don't think I can. Thanks for following up with me. If that's the conversation you have, leave that person in this digital lead flow and stick with them over time. A month later, 2 months later, their circumstances change. Their little kiddies get off into school maybe, or they find a great daycare provider, or their spouse loses their job and their circumstances are different, and now school becomes more of a reality. So sticking with this over time. So again, every 15 or so days, some sort of reach out, whether it's a very non-obtrusive email or a phone call. If you make phone calls, yes, leave messages. If anyone was about to type that question in, it's critical to leave a message. Make sure that your message, let me back up. Make sure that your communication, regardless of the medium, is not about trying to shove your program and your offering and what you do down their throat. What you are truly trying to sell people on, and I'm air quoting sell people on at this stage, particularly with a digital lead, is the idea of returning to school, the idea of going to school. You are selling education. You are not selling education for Brenda Harms University or whatever school you are sitting at today. You are selling the concept of education. And so your conversation, your dialogue, your messaging needs to be at that high level about it is a smart move to think about continuing your education or going back to school. That's the whole thing right there. It really is that simple. Say it 6 different ways from Sunday. Yes, that's what I'm saying, but same message over and over and over. Think of dreams that you have had at one point and how long it took you to talk yourself into it. And think of how much more quickly you were able to say, you know what, I do think this is a good idea for me. When a friend, a coworker, a family member, a recruiter said, you know what, yeah, you're right, it really is a good idea. Little steps. This takes us through 6 months, and then hang on, we're not done yet. I actually am a believer in this every other week or 15-day, every other, for full 12 months. Where this is different than how I would typically approach a lead that came in through a different source is that typically for leads that come in through a different source, I move them to maintenance. More of this approach every 15 days at 35 days, I've had 8 contacts minimally. I'm going to want to see a couple more contacts between 35 days and 60 days, but for most other sources at 60 days, I move them off into what I call a maintenance plan. And a maintenance plan at some schools is twice a year. At some schools, it's 4 times a year. I think 4 times a year is a good starting point. Every other month works too for those other sorts of leads. But again, I see nothing wrong with using this approach for every type of lead. I just simply am trying to be cognizant of the amount of time and energy that it would take to do this with every lead coming into your shop. So if we take a look here at the bottom, over 1 year, it's really 24 follow-ups. Some are blended, obviously. If you look back there, day 270, both a phone call and you're going to put a mail piece in. What I recommend is at least 12 phone calls over that time and 12 emails. Part of why I break this down like this for folks is because I think when you see 3 slides of contacts, it's real easy to start feeling slimy about, oh my gosh, now I'm hounding these people. It's 12 calls and 12 emails over the course of a year. No one's keeping track of that. Promise you. If they ask you to stop, stop. If they push the button on your email that says, withdraw from, please discontinue, discontinue. But until you can confirm that they want out, or I laughingly say, or you can confirm that they passed away, keep them in your lead pool. Nothing wrong with this. So for a full year with digital leads, you need to have a bit of a ongoing effort and dialogue to continue to stay with these folks. I highly suggest utilizing scripts for all of the phone messages, and the emails need to be a standard email that you have been able to get in contact with your marketing department, get put together, and just goes out. Do not spend 10 hours on an email. It is only going to be opened by 5 or 10% of your audience. That's the amount of effort you need to put into it. The idea is continued contact, not crafting a 6-paragraph perfect communication. It's not the goal here. I have also layered in here, as you'll notice on the bottom, the idea of needing 4 mailed pieces. That That's frosting on top of the cake. You got to have the cake. I think the frosting is helpful well, first off, we all love frosting. But I think the frosting is helpful from this perspective. The mailed piece does not need to be expensive. Please do not make it some giant brochure or, heaven forbid, a view book of any sort. It truly is an oversized postcard, something inexpensive that you can crank out that literally goes out and reinforces in a different medium this idea of going back to school. Again, high-level message, no big pressure, but really a, yep, you're smart for thinking about going back to school sort of piece. And I trickled those in at different points in time. I think 4 in a year is a good starting place. If you can do up to 6, that's terrific, but 4 is a good place to start. I know that there's expense with doing that. Again, this is part of why I'm saying you might not be able to do this to your whole lead pool, depending upon the size of it, but definitely these digital leads. I also like an occasional mailed piece because we get so little mail anymore that we thumb through it now. You know, it's not like your mailbox is chock full anymore. We thumb through our mail. Sometimes these things sit on the kitchen counter. It's just a nice reinforcement. In addition to that frequency, and that suggested frequency over those months, if you will, over the whole year, if I haven't completely caused you a panic yet, the other piece that I think is so critical anytime we're recruiting is that we leverage a script. There is a real, and I have been historically one of them, there is a real belief that, you know, I'm just so amazing that I get on the phone with a opportunity to leave a voicemail, and off the top of my head, I ramble off this most amazing message. None of us are as good as we think we are at doing that, and we more often than not sound a little bit foolish with those voicemail messages, or, my goodness, you know, we hit the ring and we actually got a live body on the phone. We have to be ready. What are we going to talk about? What's the discussion going to look like? So leveraging a script helps with that. And I'm not going to go into my whole usual spiel about leveraging a script, but I do want to talk about a couple of pieces of the script before we transition into offering time for questions. With a digital lead, you are very possibly going to have several communications with that person over the course of that year before they're ready to say, you know what, yeah, set me up for an appointment. I want to talk to somebody about really doing this. That's the goal, right? You're not trying to get a digital lead to enroll in school. We have to stop going to the end game. You're trying to get a digital lead to take the next step. The next step is having a more purposeful conversation with you. Believe it or not, every time they are willing to spend 5 minutes with you on the phone, or 3 minutes, or have an electronic communication back and forth with you, you have moved them one step closer. It's just a lot of baby steps. But coming in for an appointment or having the phone call for a scheduled appointment is a tremendous step forward. That's the goal with the digital lead. I say all the time, you guys have heard me say it before, the magic happens with the person, with the individual. You have to be able to have that exchange. So know that you are going to have some conversations along the way where somebody says, oh, geez, you know, Wednesday night when I submitted that form, I was crazy. I don't know what I was thinking. I'm way too busy this fall. Can't really think about this. And they put you off. Even if they put you off, stick with them. I would suggest you not wait until they say they're ready. You know, if they say, oh, I thought maybe I could start in August or September, but actually it's going to be January. Please don't wait till January to reach out to them. Stick with them. Follow the pattern of what I've just shared with you. Know that you're going to have several conversations. And if you have several conversations, you definitely need a script so you always have something to talk about. The number one most common mistake recruiters make is trying to literally wow someone with what they have to offer for a program. It never works. Unless you really have an amazing program, which most schools do not right now. We all are offering pretty much a pretty similar product. So where we wow a student is in building that relationship and in the conversation and the reinforcing to them that, yes, they're making a good decision. And then the conversation can turn to, let me tell you a little bit more about our delivery. Let me tell you about our great faculty who care. Wow. Let me tell you a little bit more about what we have to offer. But start in these first conversations with the script and let it be about them. One of the things that I like to think of when I'm recruiting a digital lead is that the first step is really getting them to buy into the idea of education. Second step is recruiting them to your institution. So again, long series of baby steps. Many of you have seen this. I've shared it before in other webinars and at conferences. When you utilize a script, this is just a nice little cheat sheet that I like to use with some specific points. For digital leads, I wouldn't get past the very first thing. What's going on that's caused you to think about returning to school at this point? What was going on Wednesday night at 11 p.m. when you submitted this lead form? Ask that question, then be quiet and let them tell you what's motivating them, what's driving them, what's helping them to think about going back to school. And if that's all you get out of a contact for 6 months, that's very, very valuable. They just shared their dream with you. So here are some different touch points that you might want to take a look at when you are having some of those conversations. As I said, emphasis question would be the first, and that for me would be a huge piece of information to have, and then I obviously get properly recorded within the CRM, slowly gaining some of this other information. What type of field are you interested in working in? Is there a job opportunity that you're interested in at your current career or in your current career that not having the next academic level is preventing you from getting? Slowly get into some of that additional information over time. Couple of quick thoughts in closing, and then like I said, I'm doing actually fairly well. We do actually have 9 minutes for questions. Wonderful. Let me reinforce. A digital lead is a different sort of lead. They are going to take time to cultivate. There is no magic in pushing them and ramming them through the funnel faster. I know, again, every VP for enrollment wishes there was, every college president wishes there was. There's not. You can dangle carrots. Oh, we have a special scholarship we're offering now that we're never going to offer again. If you lock in now, we can lock in this price for the time that it takes you to complete your degree, as long as you're continuously enrolled. This is not something we always offer. We're just doing it this semester or this term. You can dangle those carrots, but they're going to have to be off go before they leap at that sort of thing. The digital leads often take some nurturing to get off go. Again, that notion of foundation and work them over time to really start adding to your lead pool. Track conversion rates with digital leads. One of the things that I think we'll all become more sophisticated at in the years to come is as we source code leads in properly on the front end, we are going to be able to say, for example, our word of mouth leads convert at, and I'm making these numbers up, 55%. Our referral leads convert at 65%. Our mass marketing leads or traditional marketing leads are converting at 35%. Our digital leads are converting at 20%. That's important data to have. It's also important to know which recruiters are converting those digital leads at the highest rate. Believe it or not, some people are really cut out for that specific type of lead. And you may find that you have one person on your team who has a 27% conversion rate and nobody else has gotten beyond 15. I would sit down and have a conversation with that person as to whether or not they could take more digital leads, because they're obviously really, really good with them. And my guess is the magic there is their own persistence. Digital leads, as we move forward in this industry, are definitely going to be a part of your enrollment success. How big or small is up to how you work to convert them. You have to be, though, committed to doing the work that it's going to take to actually convert these leads and stick with them over time. I would never let a digital lead go and move it off into the not interested pile anytime before 6 months, minimally 6 months. And honestly, I'd probably stick with them for a year because I'm just that kind of person. I want to open this up to questions, but I just will really quickly show you I've included some contact information if you want to reach out to me to have some conversation about some of your enrollment challenges or what you've experienced around digital leads. Would love to talk with you further. And then also, again, reminder of that one slipped off the end. So the dates on the Converge conference coming up are October 21st and 22nd, and post-conference on the 23rd. But let's take a few minutes, and I'm going to ask Becky here to help me monitor some questions if anyone has questions, or what things did I not touch on within the context of this webinar that you were hoping I would have an opportunity to address, and I can take a couple of questions. Becky, are there any questions?
Oh, Brenda, great as always. And yes, we actually have a handful of questions to get us started.
Okay.
So, as Brenda said, if you have questions, keep them coming in, but I'm going to start with the ones that came in throughout the presentation. So, the first one, this one's pretty specific to one of the charts that you showed about 10 minutes in. It was a chart about the students with or without degrees. It looked like that data was from 2008. Yep. Is it more recent than that you've seen?
Great question, and the answer is no, but honestly, it should be out soon. We're always several years behind on that, and unfortunately, that is the most recent that I have been able to get my hands on. I watched the source that I got that from pretty aggressively. I guess I haven't checked it in a couple of months now, but I do believe that that is the most current data. You can it's a little bit of slicing the data in different ways. The Lumina Foundation has put out some state-by-state data, and it's in a document called, I have it actually on my desk. I think it's the document, A Stronger Nation Through Higher Education, if I'm not mistaken. And if you go into that document, they have a state-by-state breakdown of the number of people within your state that have those varying levels. You might be, I think that is 2010 data, but that national data, I think 2008 is the closest that I have.
Cool, thank you. Next question. What are some ways, this one might be a big one, what are some ways to convert or track leads without access to a CRM?
Yikes. Well, okay, so believe it or not, this is not uncommon. I just said this yesterday to the school that's just getting their adult program into their CRM, and they're like, my gosh, this is archaic. I'm like, well, you might be surprised how many schools still find themselves in this spot, specifically with adult and grad. Okay, if you're really good with an Excel spreadsheet, this is one way to do it. If you have to utilize that sort of a rudimentary approach, I will say this. On your Excel spreadsheet, you need to align people to certain dates of the month. So if in between, and let's just make up September 15th, after you get through that first 5 days, contacts you always send or contact communicate 15th and 30th for everybody who came in that window. And stuff. If you have a big lead pool, though, boy, that is tough. Shoeboxes and note cards are, of course, never advisable, but oddly enough, I do see a little bit of the paper file system still, and literally people just kind of rotating front to back. But that's, goodness sakes, it's not 1950 anymore. I'd say your best option is an Excel spreadsheet, but boy, that's even tough. There are some free tools out there, and that's why I would certainly, some tracking tools, maybe see what's out there free, but unfortunately, the people who don't have CRMs, I most often see them on Excel spreadsheets, and that's a bear to manage. You just have to figure out what's going to work for you.
Perfect. Thanks, Brenda. I did have a question come in too, just asking to clarify what a CRM is. I don't know if you want to talk about that for 2 seconds.
Sure. So customer relationship management tool, and there are tons of them in the industry. Yes, there is an expense to the CRM, but basically for anybody who's in sales, they've utilized CRMs for decades. Higher ed really has just gotten on board 15, 20, 25, maybe 30 years. Seen more on the traditional undergraduate side of the house than on the adult and grad side. We usually were dealing with smaller numbers, and so we often didn't feel like we needed the technology to support us. I will tell you now, we need the technology to support us in our highly competitive marketplace. And really, schools who are utilizing a CRM and really after it and utilizing it well, will see some nice enrollment lift just by the basis of having some more consistent and persistent follow-up based on that CRM. So it's a tool that allows you to track your every lead, how they came in, and then how you followed up with them. And your recruiters take notes within the tool. It's super, super helpful. It's also a great method for keeping track of how conversion rates are happening throughout the funnel. So CRM, you really... I'm seeing fewer and fewer schools and fewer graduate adult programs who are still able to get by without them. You are not doing a service to yourself. If you have a hefty enrollment growth goal and somebody says, what do you need to make this happen? And you don't have a CRM, that needs to be your answer. CRM.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. Lots of good questions coming in. Here's another one. Are there any other universities out there that have a digital content strategist to help with these leads and help manage these leads?
Oh, great question. So is there somebody, and I'm assuming maybe in-house, but let me tell you also externally. So internally, I think the question is, so does this somehow not go to the recruiter, but actually starts with a different person? Maybe is the question there. Typically, no. I see folks a recruiter who focuses only on digital leads. Yes, there are schools who have that. Actually, a lot of the for-profits actually have that model. But as far as overall, there's really the need to have a a mix of lead sources being fed to each one of your recruitment staff. So as far as a digital strategist who only deals with those leads when they come in, no. Now, some schools are actually hiring their own internal people to set up digital advertising for them. That's tough, though. It's tough expertise to find, and quite frankly, higher education typically doesn't pay at the rate that most of those people can make money. So it's hard to find an internal source for that. I have been notified by Becky, and I'm keeping an eyeball on the clock, and I'm seeing people drop off because they had other appointments. We have quite a few additional questions still that I did not leave enough time to get to. So here's what I'm going to do. Over the course of the next 2 days, I am going to type out all the questions that were asked, and I'm going to type out responses. And we are going to send out to you the webinar, the recording of the webinar, the slides of the webinar, and those responses to those questions. So if you asked a question, please know I'm going to get it responded to, at least a typewritten response. But again, if I'm not really getting after what your question was with that typewritten response, please pick up the phone and call me or send me an email, and I'm happy to set up a time to visit with you more. Thank you again, and most people are still actually on the phone, which is great, but thank you for taking the time for this topic. Clearly I should have minimized my presentation, did more Q&A. Thank you for taking the time for this topic, and thank you for being invested in trying to convert these leads. More and more students that I speak to are telling me this is how they're coming into their institutions, and I think it does a great disservice to us in higher education when we don't follow up aggressively with these leads. It kind of sends a message we're not that interested in those students, which I know is never the case for those of us who work in this industry. So thank you for your interest in doing a great job in your follow-up. One last reminder for the Converge conference coming up at the end of October. I hope I have the chance to see you there and talk about recruitment and digital leads and enrollment growth more with you. So thank you again for taking the time, and thanks to Converge for partnering with me on this particular webinar. Great to be invited to participate with you all. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you. Happy Thursday.
Thanks, Brenda.